What is up, everybody? Welcome back to my continued trek through Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation, the novel series. We are on Volume 4, Chapter 8. Hopefully this will be the last part of Volume 4, depending on how much time I spend on the extra chapter, because obviously that's all new stuff. That's all new stuff. But yes, to get people an update, yes, obviously I'm done with Volume 4. I am now starting on Volume 5. I do want to give people a slight warning here. We are coming up to the end of the current anime season, so depending on how I release these, I might have a little bit of a break here, so hopefully it doesn't take too long for me to get done with the reviews and the first impressions of the following season, so just be patient with me. I'll try to give you guys an update at regular basis. I know last time that was a concern for a lot of people that I stopped, but with all that said, let's jump into Chapter 8. Opening up Chapter 8, obviously we have the village of Doldia is on fire, and Rudeus is trying to figure out a way out. He's trying to tell Geese, hey, tell me where Zant is, and he's like, I can't see nothing, I can't tell you where this is at. Over time, as they're going through the village, they're obviously noticing that there's a lot of humans here, and they're hunting down the beast people, the beastfolk. They're capturing the children, they're slaughtering all the mothers, and the warriors themselves seem to be hampered in some way. It's the smell of the flames and stuff that's really messing with their senses. And this is the point where Geese tells Rudeus, like, hey, what do you want to do? Like, which side are we choosing? And again, this goes back to the whole really wondering what Geese is really, his objective is here. It obviously seems like he thinks he might know who Rudeus is. It hasn't really confirmed at this point, but it seems like he's overly relying on Rudeus. I think it's almost like he's testing him, but at the same time, you can say that Geese, and what we know of him, it seems like he's not really reliable himself. He's kind of he's not really a combat person. He's just very useful elsewhere. But it was funny because Rudeus is really thinking, these people treated me terribly. They stripped me naked. They threw me in a prison. They wouldn't listen to me tell them what my side of the story. They persecuted me basically without any evidence whatsoever or hearing my side of the argument. I wouldn't be upset, but no, in the end, he does realize, there's obviously the bad guy here. He's like, obviously the beastfolk. The beastfolk is who I'm going to back. And he does mention it later on, like this idea that he wants the beastfolk to be indebted to him, basically. But no, he figures out where the center of the village is. He raises up his hand. He uses Squall, produces this huge cloud, drops all this rain down on everything. And yes, it does seem to be having effect on the area. The bandits themselves are obviously noting that this is the boy that's creating this rain. He's going to put out the flames. We need to take him out. So he does have to kind of defend himself. And at some point, a bunch of beastfolk warriors rush by him. They're all claiming, protect this magician. This magician's helping us out. Protect him. As he's rushing forward, he does note there's this one lady that's being kind of backed up to a corner by a couple of the bandits, and he does save them. And he goes up there and he goes to heal her. Later on, they kind of mention this is Laclana, supposed to be taking care of the Sacred Beast. But it was interesting because it's noting here that this, let's not forget, Rudeus at this point is still wearing nothing but a vest. He's literally naked, and he has nothing on but a vest. But he's here healing her, taking care of her, getting rid of her wounds, and she's called to go to the Sacred Beast. Like, your duty is to protect the Sacred Beast. Go to him. And she pauses for a minute. It's almost as if she wants to thank him for healing her, but she's hesitant for a minute, and she leaves. But he does note that the way that she looked, it almost looked like she wanted to thank him. But now this is where you get the point in which they're calling out, support the magician. We're going to get our children back. And so you almost have like this front line of this. Rudeus is magician. You have the Doldia warriors themselves out there fighting. And then the bandits start retreating. And at some point, it notes the idea that the Doldia warriors are fast, obviously. He mentioned that before when he was talking about escaping. He's like, I would never be able to escape. They would catch me in no time. So he purposely... He has this point where he actually climbs on the back of one of the warriors and rides their shoulders. And he says something to the effect of, shoulder equipment Rudeus, a piece of equipment that upon encountering an emergency will deflect any attack through use of Eye of Foresight and also automatically knock down enemies. It's like a tooltip for a spell. But no, eventually they chase out and they find the last remaining of these bandits, which is Gallus. Yes, Gallus is there. He's got a child with a bag over their head, and he puts the sword to the neck of the child as a hostage. You have pretty much Gimbal, one of the beastfolk warriors, and all the other warriors are kind of surrounding him and snarling at him. And yes, of course, Gallus calls out to Rudeus, Kennel Master, what are you doing here? He's like, well, you told me to save these people. What do you think I'm doing here? He's like, yeah, them capturing all these children was fine and all, but the moment they kidnapped that Sacred Beast too, I knew we were going to get ourselves into trouble. But this is when we get into finding out what exactly Gallus's plot is. Over the following chapters, you kind of get a sense of what happened essentially was that his whole plan was to get ahead. In his field of business, it doesn't really matter what happens to your competition or your allies. It's all about you having the most success and getting ahead. So he's essentially selling out his own comrades in order to get his own success. His overall plot was to have Reserve go in there, free the children, but on the side, Gallus informed the Doldia. He wanted them to come out to rescue the children too, and he was hoping that Reserve as Superb would wipe them all out, take out all their warriors so that then he can go in there and just take whatever he wants. And yes, following that, having the fact that the rain is now coming in, which will last for 3 whole months, the idea is that if he can get out there fast enough, get the children out there, none of them will be able to, seek out them. They would have to basically give up the pursuit and hole up in their villages. And yes, mention the idea that Beastfolk are especially lucrative business when there's a certain family in the Asura Kingdom that pays quite a penny for Beastfolk. And yes, Rudeus immediately is like, yeah, I know exactly who he's talking about. I know exactly, know exactly the gray rat, know exactly who he's talking about. But of course, Gallus ends up offering to Rudeus, hey, why don't you join me? Come join me. And it does seem like some of the Beastfolk actually do acknowledge some of what he's saying. They look at Rudeus with suspicion. They're like, okay, is this guy going to turn on us? But no, he ends up telling them, no, I've decided that I'm going to make the Beastfolk indebted to me. I'm going to stick with my guns. I'm going to not do this. And so right at that point, you have all these Beastfolk. They all go to attack Gallus, and he wipes the floor with him, despite the fact that he notes that these Beastfolk are so fast. Like, he can barely keep up with them. Gallus wipes the floor with them, knocks them all out in no time, using a hostage as an actual weapon and a shield to take them all out. Geese acknowledges the fighting style that Gallus is using. North God style, Atofe style. It's just raw fighting style. And even Rudeus at this point acknowledges, man, this is what Paul was talking about. This is why Paul disparaged the North God style so much. It was disgraceful. Like, him watching what Gallus was doing was disgraceful. He's using a hostage and tactics that he hated. At this point, everybody's down. It's only Geese is at his side, and Geese is doing nothing. Like, this entire time, Geese is completely useless. Again, we've acknowledged that Geese is not a fighter. But you have this point in which Rudeus is like, what do I do? Like, there's no way that I can beat this guy. He wiped the floor with all these guys at once. He just stands there. And Gallus at that point is like, what, are you going to come at me? You're not? All right, well, later, dude. And goes to walk away, picks up the hostage and goes to walk away. It was interesting because Rudeus almost sort of questions why Gallus is willing to walk away. Like, Rudeus did say that he's not willing to join him. You would think that he would come and attack Rudeus. But Rudeus almost believes that Gallus is still kind of cautious of him. Like, almost that Gallus doesn't want to fight Rudeus because he doesn't know what Rudeus is capable of doing. Like, he may have witnessed what Rudeus did to douse all the fire, knowing that this kid's really strong, and maybe doesn't know if he could possibly defeat Rudeus. So it's almost as if he figures, okay, if Rudeus not attacking me, I'm not going to push things. I'm out of here kind of thing. But no, just as he's about to leave, that's when the Sacred Beast jumps in, attacks Gallus, and Rudeus just like, whatever, let's do this. Like, it's almost like, okay, like he had like a bark of encouragement and goes to attack. So use the shockwave. This is an interesting part, and I almost wonder if this is kind of a mistranslation. It notes that Rudeus used a shockwave to separate Gallus from the hostage, and Gallus immediately turns on Rudeus, like immediately turns on him. And it says that Rudeus is claiming that he was helping Gallus. Like, he was helping him by creating that shockwave, and he misunderstood. Not sure what he's talking about there. It was almost like it was implying that he was trying to knock the dog away from him as he was being attacked, but I don't know. Somebody in the comments can probably let me know if that's mistranslation or maybe what the web novel was saying there. But as they're fighting, he does note the idea that his eye is not really working very well here. Gallus is so fast. And yeah, somebody mentioned in one of my previous videos that I didn't really mention this, but when Rudeus had a spar with Reserve, he couldn't defeat him. And what is kind of explained there is that because Reserve always has a secondary plan with every strike that he has, the eye doesn't work very well. It's trying to predict what you'll do next, but if you have an alternate plan, it overcomes the eye. It almost requires you to see a little bit further. It's not foolproof. So yes, when Reserve comes down with an overstrike, he might have planned that if Rudeus brings up his arm to block the shaft or something like that, he'll go around and slice the side. And so just having that second plan or whatever is enough to overcome the eye. But I think with Gallus specifically, it's that he's so fast, Rudeus is not able to react fast enough. I guess to Rudeus's favor, he does acknowledge the idea that he is faster than Eris, but Eris is sort of so unique that she doesn't have a rhythm to her. But yeah, at some point he ends up throwing a knife, it ends up jabbing into his foot, making him unable to flee. The dog bites him, but then Gallus knocks him over to a tree. And that's when Rudeus hears behind him North God original crying bomb, and a bag is thrown towards Gallus, and it's like a poof of ashes, it just explodes. And that was enough for Rudeus to see, I have an opening, and he does this fiery explosion, knocking Gallus back. It's kind of wondering, you know, is the situation over? It looks like he's unconscious. Is it over kind of thing? And it's funny because Geese at this point says, that's exactly how the North God Style guys work. They always cover their face when they hear crying bomb. And that's another one of those ones where I'm like, I hope at some point they mention what this means. Like, this, because Rudeus even himself is like, so they have like a habit of covering their face when they hear that. That's kind of a weird thing that they all sort of have. Like, this is their weakness, and so they always have to try to figure out some way of overcoming it. Like this ash explosion or this crying bomb, whatever that is something that works against them. Is the crying bomb the ash itself, or is it just an ability that somebody has and he's trying to mimic it? I'll be really interested to see if that's something they get into again later. It was so funny because the battle's over, so he goes over there to Gallus, he picks up his sword and he goes to throw it away, and the Sacred Beast snatches it in the air like he's catching a frisbee. This is where we get a little bit of a feeling about what happened to Rajerd following what we kind of covered in the previous video. The fact that at some point Rajerd ran in with this chief. They took the kids into Zantport, and apparently at this point Rajerd discovered the whole plan, like what Gallus's plan was, and he immediately went to go attack the smuggler ship. Like there was more children. Obviously Gustav kind of disapproves of this, but even still Rajerd leaves Eris with all the children and goes, he knows the idea that Eris had this stupid pervy grin on her face, being able to take care of all these cute cat and dog girls. Here's where things get really sticky with Rajerd's situation, is that obviously this is a bad thing. They kidnap these children, they're going to be smuggling them, and they only have so much time that they're about to leave port. So Rajerd immediately goes and attacks them, and Zantport claims that it's an attack on the final voyage from the port, like that he shouldn't have done it. And this is mainly because there was important goods on that ship, and that attacking a ship in their dock is a serious felony. But in response, Gustav protests to this. This is an enslavement of the Beastfolk. This is a serious crime for the holy country of Millis. And while the garrison themselves are like, you know, that's fine, but you should have informed us, and we would have handled it. But again, like I said earlier, this is like they did this in the nick of time. There was no time to come there and tell them. It was 50 children total that Rajerd ended up saving. And the problem that Zantport has at this point, and that really kicks up the issue here, is that apparently their officials were taking bribes. So they were allowing this to happen. And so even if they told them, there was a good chance that nothing would have happened. Now, this is where it gets even worse, and I don't remember this at all covered in the anime, by the way. Things escalated like real bad between the Beastfolk and the Zantport. Because again, essentially Zantport themselves, the officials, were allowing their children to be taken. This is a serious crime. This is something that will cause a war. So Gustav and all of his warriors were called to the Zantport, and they stood at the entrance. And there was a standoff with the garrison of the Zantport. But eventually, thankfully, Zantport eventually backed down, and they paid the Beastfolk a hefty sum in compensation. And so, when Rudeus is over here wondering, where the heck is Rajerd? This was this 2-week span that Rajerd was kind of involved with. This is why it took them so long to get back. And to wrap up this whole situation, eventually Gallus is given up to the officials at the Zantport, and that concludes that story for Gallus for now. I think I noted when the anime aired, I'm like, I don't know if that's the end of Gallus. He's still alive. Moving to chapter 9, we pretty much have Rudeus along with Eris and Rajerd are now in the Doldia village, and they are seen as heroes. Gaius apologizes by going on his back with his belly exposed, which apparently is something that the Beastfolk do as a way of apology. Again, another case where the anime, I think, had one of the women there. It was just him. And the joke that kind of comes from this is that Rudeus almost wants him to stop. Like, okay, I get it. Stop, because it's almost as if he's jealous of the fact that this guy has got this hairy, muscular six-pack. But no, it wasn't enough for Eris. Eris, like, punches the dude right in the stomach, pours water on him, and pretty much says, there, finally, now we're even. He's like, gosh, Eris, I love you. This is where we have this room is filled with Rudeus, Edis, Rigurd. We have Gustav, which again is the village chief. We have Geese, which later on we find out is Ghislaine's brother. We have Mini Tona, who's later called Tona. Tona is the middle daughter of Geese. And then we have Tersina, who is the middle daughter of the Doldia tribe leaders, which she unfortunately is stuck there, not able to go back home because obviously this big rain's coming in. Here we again, we have this moment where they mention a name and you have to take note of it. I don't know where he mentions, oh yeah, by the way, there's this Linnea who is Geese's older daughter, but she's apparently studying abroad and somewhere in another country. So write down that name, Linnea. We're obviously going to run into Linnea later. Following this, we have this little goofy moment. He's hearing all these woofs and mews, and he's loving it. And at some point, they're mentioning the idea that they're so happy that they were saved, and they heard about this sick, twisted family in the Asura Kingdom that just wants beast folks for sexual reasons. And Edis is like, there's no place for Asura nobles that would do that kind of stuff. And it's like, Edis, it's your family. It's your family. She still sees Saras as like this good man. This is the point where Edis takes note of her ring and goes, oh yeah, that's right. Do any of you know who Ghislaine is? And yeah, Geese knows exactly who Ghislaine is. And he immediately just kind of spits out that she's a stain on her tribe. Her mother gave her that ring so that she would stop going berserk. She's destructive, good for nothing. And Edis, obviously not liking this, immediately says, shut up. You don't know anything about her. She's brave. She'll come and save me at a moment's notice. She's powerful. She's fast. And this is obviously completely shocking him. He's like, what are you talking about? Are we talking about the same person here? Which is technically what Rudeus says. Like, he's telling, Edis, calm down. Let's end this conversation. He's like, don't you like Ghislaine? Do you hate Ghislaine? He's like, no, what you see as what Ghislaine is and what they obviously see in what Ghislaine, the same name. We're not talking about the same person here. Obviously, there's difference here. But Geese eventually apologized. Like, he's like, look, is she really that incredible now? And Rudeus is like, yeah, I respect her at least. A week passes. They're being fed well, despite the fact they're in like pretty bad situation after this whole attack. It seems like they're still treating them as heroes. He talks about how on a regular basis, you have some children will fall off the rafters into the floodwaters. He shocks a lot of people by him basically lifting them back out of the water using his magic. He talked about, I probably could get us out of here just by stopping the storm, but he knows that Roxy at some point told him to be careful about, manipulating the weather itself and stopping storms because you don't know what will happen to the ecosystem itself. Just stopping this rain could end up harming the forest itself. He wanders around. At some point, he notes like there's this one spot where you can look up to this one pathway, and he's like waiting for some, hot woman to walk by so that he can see up their skirt, but unfortunately, Geese is the one that walks by. And they have a little quick conversation talking about how, oh man, you're free too? He's like, yeah, they wanted to recognize me for helping them out, so they let me out. And he's like, I hope you learned the lesson. And I'm like, no, I'm probably going to get back right back into it. And he's like, oh, did you hear that, everybody? He says he hasn't learned his lesson. He's like, dude, stop. Rudeus does mention, look, I still have your vest. Let me give you your vest back. And he's like, no, man, don't worry about it. You keep it, man. He kind of knows that this guy's kind of cool. I mean, he kind of felt like he was a little bit non-committal, but at the same time, kind of reminds him of Paul. He's not really a bad guy. And at this point, kind of wonders, I wonder how Paul's doing. 2 weeks pass, and we have a little brief moment where Rudeus apparently is trying to learn how to use their howl. Apparently, these beast folks, one of their special abilities they have is using a howl to affect the balance of their enemy. And so he spends a little time with the chief, Gustav, trying to figure out how to do that. And he acknowledges that he's sort of got the gist of it. It's all about, providing mana to your throat in a certain way, but he hasn't really been able to figure it out. He says the results are really just subpar. He gets a little mad in the idea that it seems like it's a special thing about the beast folk. Like they have special vocal cord or something that allows them to do it, which frustrates him because it's kind of a limit that the humans can't do what they can do, but yet they can learn humans' magic, which I would argue technically the humans learned the elves' magic. Come on, Rudeus, you know your history. We have a little brief moment where Gustav is a little bit shocked by the fact that Rudeus knows how to do incantationless spells, and this is one of those funny moments where he's like just kind of talking up Roxy. Gustav is wondering where he learned it, and he's like, oh, that was Roxy. My master Roxy taught me how to do it. Not saying that he learned how to do it. He's saying that Roxy did. So I had like this little brief moment reading this going, this is going to be another one of those things that Troubledore is going to be singing about, talking about these crazy stories that Roxy's been through. Now they're going to start preaching about the fact that this blue-haired magician that, by age 12 was S rank. Now they're going to be starting to say that she also teaches young boys how to do incantational spells. Moving on, 3 weeks have passed, and we have this period of time where a lot of monsters are getting into the village itself. He talks about the rain itself seems to be messing with their senses, so Rizurd and Edis and Rudeus are kind of helping quell these monsters and take them out. He talked about how he took out this one chameleon-like reptile and saved this child, and they come up there and they lick his cheek to thank him. He talks about he's kind of become a celebrity to all the children. On a regular basis, they'll come up to him and lick his cheek and be happy about him, and they really like him. And he talks about the fact that Edis, in her usual fashion, to her family's infamy, gets like all excited at these children. Scares away the children with her heavy breathing, patting their heads and touching their tails. But no, at this point, he does mention the idea that at some point he sat down with Rizurd and was kind of suggesting the idea that they help them protect the city. But Rizurd didn't want to. Rizurd protested to it. He said that, no, these are warriors. And if we were to come in here and offer our help to protect their people, that would be disrespectful to the honor of the warriors here. Again, he sees things quite differently than what Rudeus does. Rudeus is like, we're here. Why don't we help them? From Rizurd's perspective, he's just seeing it more in the idea that these people are going to feel insulted. But yeah, the moment that they ask Geese is like, heck yeah, do it. And he does note that at some point, it did seem like a lot of the warriors were not for it. But the moment they took down like these big, huge monsters, like no problem, they quickly changed their tune. Like they're like, oh, these guys are great. Yeah, heck yeah, help us out. Rizurd notes the idea that it seems like things have changed for the Beastfolk. He said this idea of proposing to Beastfolk 100 years ago, protecting their people, they would be completely against it. And they get a little bit more into this later on, as you see that Rizurd sits down with Gustav, the village chief, and they talk a little bit about how warriors themselves has changed over time. Rizurd mentions that, yeah, most warriors that I run into these days are weak. And yeah, Gustav agrees. Like, all these warriors, these Beastfolk warriors, they're weak compared to what the warriors were from the past. 1 month passed, and we have the scene of Rudeus in the box. This was so different than the anime. I think at some point you have this point where Edis is with Tona and the other girl, and they're in the water, and Rudeus is inside of this box watching, and then I think at some point this the Sacred Beast shows up and everything. But no, in the novel, it's not that bad. It is bad still, but it's not that bad. You kind of notice the idea that Edis, Tona, and Tersina have become friends. And Rudeus is watching them, and he's knowing the idea that Edis is now teaching them human tongue, which he's like, oh, that's great. Like, she's gone this far. Like, she's matured so much. And it's technically the first time Edis has really had friends her age. So he's kind of just watching with admiration. And then he's also knowing the idea that Edis is still kind of pervy around them. And he's kind of wondering, like, why does Geese get mad whenever I'm pervy around those kids, and yet Edis is always that way? Yeah, it's obviously because he's a woman. At some point, you have Geese. He walks up and talks to Edis and apologizes about Ghislaine again. And he's like, is what you're saying true? Is she really that great now? It's like, yeah. She's a sword king. She knows magic. Rudeus taught her magic. He's like, no, you jest. She's like, no, it's true. Rudeus taught her magic and arithmetic. She's boasting about all the lessons they did, and eventually he kind of accepts it and walks away, and then he confronts Rudeus, who's watching. He's wondering, like, what are you doing in this box? Yeah, this is when we find out that this entire time that he's observing all that's happening, he's been in a box. He's like, what are you doing in that box? He's like, well, observing people is my hobby. No, Gaius says specifically in a way that, what is the respectable teacher doing in a place like this? He's observing people. It's my hobby. But now he's asking about how he trained Ghislaine. He's like, just like normal. It seems like whatever she went through with her hardship, with her adventures, it kind of changed her a little bit. So she was a little more receptive about learning things. And we kind of noted that when we had that whole situation with Ghislaine. She was explaining to Edis why she wants to learn is because the moment that their party kind of fell apart with Paul and Zenith leaving, she knew that she needed to learn this stuff. And yeah, from Gaius's perspective, he's like, no, this is the girl that when she would attack anybody over anything that she didn't like. She was unhinged. Rudeus in his own head's like, Gaius kind of has a point. I mean, he's been burned plenty of times, but he sort of sees him as a failure of a brother because he was weaker than his sister. And reflecting on this, he starts to wonder how his own sisters are doing, Norn and Aisha. At this point, he kind of mentioned that he always wanted to send them a letter to him know that he's okay, but he figured being on the Demon Continent, that letter would never get to them. But at this point, he knows the moment that I get to the holy country of Milis, I need to send them a letter. At this point, he asks them, how long are you going to stay in that box? And in Rudeus' mind, he's thinking, yeah, it's night soon. They're going to come home. They're going to do some changing. And then Gaius is like, I could smell the sexual arousal. He says, I apologize to you, but if you touch my daughter, that's a different story. He says, I will kick this box right into those floodwaters. A month and a half passes. We get a little insight into the tribes themselves. We talk about the Doldias being a special tribe. They're the ones that maintain peace in the forest, as well as take care of the sacred beast. You have the Doldia tribe, which is the cat-like people. You have the Doldia tribe, which is the dog-like ones. And these are pretty much the main branches of families, and everything kind of branches from that. He also talks about in the forest, you do have the halflings and the elves living there. They're concentrated in the northern part of the forest. Gustav mentioned the idea that they all kind of keep separate, but they're all kind of a family. They still, you know, once a year, they'll get together and they'll have a little festival near the great sacred tree. He mentioned the idea that the dwarves live at the foot of the Blue Worm Mountain. He do mention the idea that the blue dragons will kind of travel across the world and they'll return to those mountains every now and then to nest. And they lay eggs and they raise their young, but they only do this about once every 10 years. 2 months pass and you have the sacred dog coming to visit Rudeus. They've kind of formed a little bond. Rudeus is starting to work on his reserved figures, hoping to give them out, you know, give a face to this boogeyman that everybody has, which, yes, over time we'll find out that he goes out, does a mission, then hand people one of these figures. He plays with the sacred beast for a little bit, and then Laklana shows up, and she's obviously apologizing again, but asking him not to get too friendly with the sacred beast. She says that she smells that arousal again, and he's like, it's because of you. Every time you come here, what do you want me to think? You bend over and apologize. What do you think I'm going to do? He says in his own head, whenever she apologizes, he role plays at being this bad cop saying, you know, look, I'll overlook things if you do a little thing for me. We get a little explanation about the sacred beast itself. This magical beast is born every few hundred years, and it's in response to the world when it faces crisis. It was set out alongside the hero themselves, using its great power to save the world. They've taken immense care of it. They keep it very sheltered, away from the outside world. They stay in a restricted area deep within the forest itself at the sacred tree. Now, the interesting thing they note here, and I kind of noted this when I was watching the anime, I'm like, oh yeah, Rudeus obviously is going to be this hero because the dog really likes him. He's the main character. But he specifically mentions that it's going to take another 100 years before this dog, the sacred beast, will even mature. And that's the point in which the world will meet calamity. Now, yes, I guess technically Rudeus could be 112 or so years old before this whole catastrophe happens, and he has the sacred dog at his side as he's running around with a cane. I'm perfectly open to that being the last volume. Please don't spoil. But it's kind of interesting to note that. It is interesting, though, because at some point you do have Laklana is talking to the sacred beast, and he's translating there. So they're having a conversation, basically. And this is where you do note the idea that it's the sacred beast it's because the sacred beast that Rudeus was fed well. Like, he told her to feed him well. And he doesn't understand the concepts of, well, why didn't you help me when I was captured? And he's like, well, I don't understand that. He doesn't understand that concept. He's still a child, technically. He's like, well, I'm always locked up, too. I didn't think it was a problem. But no, Laklana specifically asks, and we don't get the here context here, but she says, could it be that Rudeus is the hero? And he says, Roof, what are you saying? He says, Wolf. He says, I see, but woof, I understand. So it's like, she says that he stated that no, he's not the hero, but it's very grateful of him. So again, we don't really know exactly what he says, but that's what she's saying, is that the dog said, no, he's not the hero, but I really like him or something. Kind of following this whole thing, and he says that he made Laklana mad because he tried to teach the secret beast how to shake. After some time, the rain finally stops, and that's when we go into chapter 10. And that's it. I'm going to wrap it up there. That's volume 4, chapters 8 through 9. I was going to keep going, but it's going to turn out to be way too long at this point. But really cool little segment of chapters. And I think, again, like I said before, it seems like it's just adding more details to what we already know. The stuff that was adapted, unfortunately, did not get the full picture of a lot of stuff. And like I said, I'm okay with that. At the same time, it's always good going into the novels and get those extra little information that you can get from there. I think my biggest takeaway from this segment of chapters is obviously the whole thing around Zantport and the near war that happened between the Beastfolk and Zantport, which again, I don't think any of that was in the actual anime adaptation, and it gives you a broader picture of something that really could have been bad. Like, things got really bad. Additionally, the whole howling magic stuff. I'm really curious. At some point in the novel series, he said it's obviously not effective, but I think he did say it, like, caused people to flinch. So I'm curious at some point if he utilizes that technically training that he got from the chief to utilize it in some way later on. And of course, getting all the information about the beast tribes themselves, getting more details in that stuff, and yes, the whole thing with the sacred beast, which we'll see how that turns out in some 20 volumes. But anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, if you did, make sure to hit that like button down below, comment, let me know what you thought of this whole segment of chapters. Additionally, I love the feedback. I love hearing from you guys. I can't reply to everything anymore, but I try to at least read everything, so I apologize if I don't get a chance to reply to you, or if it takes me a while. Sometimes I go back and I check to make sure I don't miss anything. As always, if you're new to the channel and you want to get all my content, including this content, I have a subscribe button there that you can hit. Make sure to hit that button. Additionally, if you want to support the channel more, we have a Patreon link, a tips link, and a super thanks button down below. I greatly appreciate everybody that supports us. It means a lot to me, and y'all take care.